In the opulent Sterling estate library, a quiet social worker was about to shatter her family's world. What started as organizing funeral paperwork took a shocking turn when she discovered a brass key unlocking her mother's devastating secret. Chloe Sterling wasn't your typical heiress. For 28 years, she had rejected wealth and privilege, known for choosing modest living over mansion life. When she found documents revealing an $80 million inheritance and her true parentage, she had no idea she was walking into an impossible choice. Chloe discovered a truth that would either save her siblings from destroying each other or obliterate everything they believed about family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had stopped just as the hearse arrived at the Sterling estate, as if even the weather respected Richard Sterling's final command for perfect timing. Chloe watched from the grand foyer's window as her father's casket was carried past the meticulously maintained gardens, past the fountain where she'd once thrown pennies and wished for his attention. He would have hated this weather, Marcus said, appearing beside her with a champagne flute already half empty despite the early hour. His designer suit fit perfectly, but Chloe noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the door every few minutes as if expecting unwelcome visitors. He hated most things. Emma's voice cut through the murmur of arriving guests. She glided toward them in her black Armani dress, every inch the grieving eldest daughter for the cameras. But Chloe caught the calculating gleam in her sister's eyes as she surveyed the crowd. Though I suppose that's what made him so successful. The service itself was a performance. 200 of Silicon Valley's elite filled the estate's ballroom, transformed with white lilies and understated elegance. Chloe sat between her siblings in the front row, feeling like an imposter in her modest black dress. She'd learned long ago not to compete with Emma's designer wardrobe or Marcus's effortless style. Instead, she'd focused on being useful, invisible, the family member who smoothed over conflicts and asked for nothing in return. Father Thomas spoke beautifully about Richard's legacy, his contributions to technology, his vision for the future. He didn't mention Richard's inability to connect with his children, the way he'd treated family dinners like board meetings, or how he'd spoken to Chloe like she was a moderately disappointing employee rather than his daughter. As the final hymn faded, family attorney James Chen rose from his seat near the back. Chloe had known James since childhood. He'd been the one to explain why Daddy missed her school plays, why family vacations were always postponed indefinitely. If I may, James's voice carried the authority of someone who'd managed the Sterling family's affairs for over 2 decades. Richard left specific instructions for the reading of his will to take place immediately following the service. Emma's posture straightened like a predator catching a scent. Marcus finished his champagne and reached for another glass. Chloe simply watched James's face, noting the tension around his eyes. The crowd filed out respectfully, leaving only the immediate family and a few close associates. Victoria Hartwell materialized at Emma's side as if summoned, a tall, sharp-featured woman in an immaculate suit. Emma had clearly come prepared for war. James opened his briefcase with deliberate care, withdrawing a thick document. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that your father was particular about how he structured his final wishes. The language is intentionally complex. Just read it, James, Emma said, her voice carrying the imperious tone she'd perfected in corporate boardrooms. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Are we, though? Because I feel like we're 12 years old again, waiting to find out who gets the bigger allowance this month. Chloe placed a gentle hand on Marcus's arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his expensive suit. Let's just listen. James cleared his throat. I, Richard Sterling, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my earthly possessions in the following manner. He paused, glancing up at the 3 siblings. To my eldest child, Emma Sterling Blackwood, I leave 35% of my estate, acknowledging her business acumen and dedication to the Sterling legacy. Emma's smile was razor-sharp. Appropriate. To my son, Marcus Sterling, I leave 40% of my estate, with the expectation that he will use this inheritance to fulfill the potential I have always seen in him. Marcus's hand stilled on his glass. Even in his gambling-addled state, Chloe could see him calculating the numbers. His relief was palpable, desperate in a way that made her stomach clench. "And to my daughter Chloe Sterling," James continued, his voice careful, measured, "I leave 25% of my estate, with additional considerations to be determined by family obligations and circumstances that may come to light after my passing." The silence stretched like a held breath. Emma was the first to break it. "Additional considerations?" Her voice could have cut glass. "What exactly does that mean?" "The language is deliberately vague," James admitted. "Your father included several codicils that reference unforeseen circumstances and, quote, family obligations that transcend blood. That's not legally binding language." Victoria Hartwell spoke for the first time, her voice cool and professional. "My client has every right to contest vague provisions." "Your client?" Chloe looked between Emma and the attorney. "You hired a lawyer? Already?" Emma's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and hungry underneath. "I hired an advisor, Chloe. Someone who understands how these things work. Unlike some people, I don't believe in leaving my financial future to chance." Marcus set down his glass with enough force to make the crystal ring. "Christ, Emma, Dad's not even in the ground yet." "The ground is exactly where he is," Emma shot back. "And crying about it won't change the fact that he left us a puzzle instead of a proper will." "Whose interests?" Chloe asked quietly. "Because it sounds like you're only interested in protecting your own." Emma turned on her younger sister with the full force of her courtroom training. "I'm interested in making sure our father's legacy isn't squandered by people who never understood his vision. I spent 15 years learning this business, Chloe. You think you deserve an equal voice in how this empire is managed?" The words hit like physical blows, but something about hearing it now, in this room where her father's absence seemed to echo off the walls, finally broke something inside her chest. "I never said I wanted to manage anything," she replied, her voice steady despite the hurt. "I just thought we could get through one day without treating each other like enemies." "We're not enemies," Marcus said, though his eyes were already calculating. "We're just realistic about what this means." James cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. Your father left a sealed envelope in his study with instructions that it should only be opened when the time is right." "Meaning?" Victoria asked. "Meaning, I have no idea what's in it, or when it's supposed to be opened, but given Richard's thoroughness, I suspect it contains important information about those additional considerations." Emma was already moving toward the door. "Then let's open it now." "Emma," James's voice carried a warning. "Your father was very specific." "I won't be held hostage by dead man's games, James." Emma's composure finally cracked. "I've worked too hard to let some cryptic puzzle undermine everything I've earned." She swept from the room with Victoria close behind. Marcus lingered for a moment, his earlier relief evaporating. "She's serious," he said to Chloe, his voice hollow. "She's actually going to fight this. Are you going to fight back?" Marcus looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something she'd never seen in her golden boy brother's face before, genuine fear. "I don't have a choice." The words hung between them like a confession. Marcus followed Emma out, leaving Chloe alone with James in the vast ballroom. "They'll destroy each other," she said quietly. James nodded, his weathered face creased with something that might have been grief. "That's what I'm afraid of." Outside, the rain had started again. Chloe watched her siblings drive away in separate cars, each already plotting their next move in a war that had been declared before their father was even buried. Marcus's hand shook as he set down his phone, the third threatening call from creditors in as many hours. The funeral reception had ended barely 2 hours ago, and already the vultures were circling. From his penthouse office overlooking the bay, he watched the lights of San Francisco flicker to life as darkness settled over the city like a shroud. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he sat in a building worth more than most people would see in a lifetime, wearing a suit that cost $5,000, and he was essentially broke. Worse than broke. The gambling debts alone exceeded $2 million, and that didn't include the leveraged investments that had gone spectacularly wrong, or the private loans he'd taken to cover his tracks. 40% of $200 million. The number had been spinning through his head since James read the will. $80 million. Enough to cover everything, to start fresh, to finally become the man his father had always wanted him to be. But Emma's lawyer had made it clear that nothing would be simple. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a creditor. It was Tommy Nakamura, the kind of man who owned underground poker games and expected his debts paid promptly. "Marcus, buddy." Tommy's voice carried the fake warmth of a predator playing with its food. "Heard about your old man. My condolences." "Thank you." Marcus loosened his tie, feeling the noose of his situation tighten around his neck. "Thing is, grief doesn't stop the clock, you know? My investors are getting antsy about that 2.5 you owe. They're not sentimental types." 2.5 million. Marcus closed his eyes. "I'll have it soon." "The will." "Yeah, I heard about that too. Funny thing about wills, they take time to probate. My people, they prefer cash in hand." Tommy's laugh was cold. "You know where to find me if you want to try winning it back. High stakes game tonight. Could solve all your problems, or make them a lot worse." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his reflection in the window, seeing his father's eyes staring back at him. Richard Sterling had built an empire through calculated risks and iron discipline. His son had inherited the appetite for risk, but none of the discipline. Across town, in the sterile elegance of her Pacific Heights mansion, Emma Sterling Blackwood sat across from Victoria Hartwell, a bottle of expensive wine between them and legal documents spread across the marble dining table like battle plans. "The language about family obligations that transcend blood is problematic," Victoria said, her manicured finger tracing the relevant passage. "It's vague enough to justify almost any interpretation. A good opposing counsel could argue it refers to moral obligations, charitable giving, even adopted family members." Emma sipped her wine, her mind already 3 moves ahead. "What about the mental competency angle? Possible, but difficult. Your father was sharp until the end, by all accounts. However, the timing is interesting. He made these changes to his will only 6 months ago, right after your mother's death anniversary. Grief can affect judgment." "He wasn't grieving," Emma said flatly. "He was planning something. My father never did anything without a reason." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. "What do we know about James Chen? How long has he been the family attorney?" 23 years. Impeccable reputation, no disciplinary actions. But he was also Helen's personal attorney before she died. If there are family secrets, he'd know them. Emma's reflection smiled back at her from the window. Cold, calculating, beautiful in the way that sharp knives were beautiful. "Then perhaps it's time we had a conversation with dear James about his professional obligations." Meanwhile, in her modest Richmond district apartment, Chloe Sterling sat on her second-hand couch, staring at a small brass key in her palm. James had pressed it into her hand as they finished cleaning up after the reception, his weathered face creased with concern. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he'd said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "It opens a safety deposit box at First National. Box 1247. "Why?" she'd asked, but James had only shaken his head. "Some things are better discovered than explained, Chloe, but be careful. Your mother's love always came with a price." Now, alone in her apartment with her rescue cat Oliver purring on her lap, she turned the key over in her fingers. Her mother had been dead for 5 years, but Helen Sterling's presence still haunted the family in ways both subtle and profound. She'd been the one who remembered birthdays, who tried to bridge the gap between Richard's emotional distance and his children's need for connection. Chloe's phone rang, startling Oliver into an indignant leap to the floor. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "How are you holding up?" she asked, though she could hear the answer in his ragged breathing. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." His voice was different, stripped of its usual charm, raw with desperation. "Are you planning to contest the will?" The question caught her off guard. "Contest it?" "Marcus, I don't even want the money. I never have." "That's not what Emma thinks. She's convinced you're hiding something. that you and James are planning some kind of end run around the inheritance. Chloe felt a chill run down her spine. What are you talking about? The way James looked at you today. The way he made sure to mention that sealed envelope. Emma thinks Dad left you something extra. Something outside the will. The key seemed to burn in Chloe's palm. That's ridiculous. Is it? Marcus's voice was getting thicker, and she could hear the clink of ice against glass. Because I've been thinking about it, and you were always Mom's favorite. If anyone was going to get special treatment. Marcus, are you drunk? A pause. Then, quieter. I'm in trouble, Chloe. Real trouble. The kind that doesn't wait for probate courts and legal proceedings. I need that inheritance, and I need it soon. What kind of trouble? But the line had already gone dead. Chloe stared at her phone, then at the key, feeling the weight of secrets she didn't understand pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Outside her window, San Francisco glittered with the promise of wealth and opportunity, but all Chloe could think about was her mother's last words to her 5 years ago. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the truth, sweetheart. But sometimes the greatest kindness is keeping that truth hidden. At the time, Helen had been delirious with fever, dying of the cancer that had ravaged her elegant frame. Chloe had assumed it was just the medication talking. Now, with the key burning a hole in her palm and her family already circling each other like wounded predators, she wondered if her mother had been more lucid than anyone realized. The brass key caught the lamplight, seeming to wink at her with knowledge she wasn't sure she wanted to possess. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning fog rolled off San Francisco Bay like a gray curtain, muffling the sounds of the city as Chloe stood before the imposing granite facade of First National Bank. She'd barely slept, the brass key burning a hole in her pocket while her mind raced through possibilities. James's warning echoed in her thoughts. Your mother's love always came with a price. Inside the bank's hushed marble interior, she was escorted to the safety deposit box vault by a stern-faced woman who examined the key and Chloe's identification with bureaucratic precision. Box 1247 Saturday in the middle tier, unremarkable among hundreds of identical metal rectangles that held the secrets of San Francisco's elite. The key turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. Inside, she found a manila envelope thick with documents, and a smaller sealed letter, addressed simply to "My darling Chloe," in her mother's distinctive handwriting. Her hands trembled as she lifted out the contents, carrying them to the small privacy room where fluorescent lights hummed overhead like witnesses to secrets finally being unveiled. The documents made no sense at first. Investment portfolios, trust fund papers, bank statements showing balances that made her head spin. $80 million. The number stared back at her from multiple pages, each one bearing her name as the sole beneficiary of the Helen Sterling Irrevocable Trust. But it was the letter that shattered her world. My precious Chloe, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and your father's will has been read. I pray that what I'm about to tell you won't destroy the love I've seen in your heart, but you deserve the truth about who you are and why your path through this family has been different from your siblings. You are not Richard's biological daughter. The words hit her like a physical blow. Chloe set the letter down, her vision blurring as the sterile bank rooms seemed to tilt around her. Not Richard's daughter. The phrase repeated in her mind like a mantra of destruction, unraveling every assumption she'd ever made about herself. With shaking hands, she continued reading. Your father is Thomas Chen, James's older brother, who was my business partner in the early days after I married Richard. Thomas was brilliant, kind, and understood me in ways your father never could. Our relationship was brief but profound, and when I discovered I was pregnant, I made the choice to let Richard believe you were his. Thomas died 2 years ago, never knowing the truth. I couldn't risk destroying 3 families for one moment of truth, but I built this trust fund to ensure you would never be dependent on Richard's grudging acknowledgement or Emma and Marcus's charity. Memories flooded back with devastating clarity. Richard's coldness toward her, his obvious favoritism for Marcus, the way he always seemed to be studying her face as if looking for something he couldn't find. Emma's casual cruelty about Chloe not being a real Sterling. even her own feeling of being perpetually out of place in a family that looked nothing like her. She thought of Michael Chen. She'd found him easily through online searches after learning about Thomas. An environmental lawyer in Seattle, passionate about social justice, with kind eyes that looked remarkably like her own. Her half-brother who had no idea she existed. The letter continued with details about Helen's secret business ventures, her careful investments, and the conditions of the trust fund. To access the money, Chloe would need to provide DNA evidence of her parentage, evidence that would invalidate Richard's will entirely, since it was predicated on the assumption that all 3 children were his biological offspring. I know this seems impossible, my darling girl, but you must understand that Richard suspected. The final changes to his will, those vague clauses about family obligations that transcend blood, I believe he was protecting himself from the truth he couldn't bear to face directly. The money is yours by right, earned through my own work and investments, but using it will destroy your siblings' inheritance and expose a secret that will redefine your family forever. I cannot make this choice for you. I can only love you enough to give you the power to choose for yourself. Whatever you decide, know that you were conceived in love and raised with fierce devotion. You are my greatest treasure, and I regret only that I could not give you the open acknowledgement you deserved. All my love, Mom. Chloe set the letter down with hands that no longer felt like her own. Around her, the bank's safety deposit vault hummed with air conditioning and muffled conversations, but she felt utterly alone, suspended between the person she'd been an hour ago and whoever she was supposed to be now. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Emergency family meeting. Emma's bringing her lawyer. Something about hidden assets. Can you come to the estate? Hidden assets. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. Here she sat, the owner of $80 million that her siblings were probably already trying to find, while they tore each other apart fighting over money that legally might not even belong to them. She thought about Marcus's desperation, the fear in his voice when he'd called, about Emma's cold ambition and her certainty that she deserved the largest share of Richard's fortune, about the nephew she'd helped raise, Angela, who was caught in the middle of this destructive spiral. And she thought about her mother, brilliant and trapped, who had loved a man she couldn't have, and built a secret fortune to protect a daughter she couldn't publicly claim. Chloe carefully gathered the documents, her mother's letter, and the various legal papers that detailed a trust fund worth more than the sterling inheritance her siblings were fighting over. She thought about James Chen, who had kept this secret for 5 years, watching her family destroy itself while knowing he held the key to everything. As she locked the safety deposit box and walked back through the marble halls of the bank, one thought crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. She now possessed the power to end her siblings' war, but only by revealing a truth that would destroy everything they thought they knew about their family. The fog was lifting as she emerged onto the San Francisco streets, but Chloe felt like she was walking deeper into a storm that was just beginning. Chloe's apartment felt like a stranger's home when she returned from the bank. Every familiar object, the secondhand furniture she'd carefully chosen, the social work textbooks lining her shelves, the photos of her family that now felt like evidence of an elaborate lie, seemed to mock her with its ordinariness. How could her life look exactly the same when everything had changed? She spread the trust fund documents across her small dining table, the financial statements and legal papers forming a paper trail of deception that stretched back 28 years. $80 million. The number felt abstract, meaningless, like a figure from someone else's life. Her laptop hummed to life as she began searching for Thomas Chen with new urgency. The obituary painted the picture of a man she would have been proud to call father, an environmental engineer who dedicated his life to sustainable technology, a mentor to young professionals, a man who'd touched countless lives with his quiet generosity and sharp intellect. The photo accompanying the article showed a face that could have been her own masculine reflection. The same dark eyes, the same slightly stubborn jawline, even the way he smiled, cautious but warm, as if kindness were something to be protected rather than displayed. Michael Chen appeared in several of the photos, standing beside his father at various award ceremonies and environmental conferences. 30 years old, a successful lawyer specializing in indigenous rights and environmental protection. Everything about him suggested the kind of principled idealism that Chloe recognized in her own approach to social work. Her half-brother, The words felt foreign and familiar simultaneously. Her phone rang, startling her from her research. James Chen's name appeared on the screen. "I wondered when you'd call," she said without preamble. "You went to the bank." His voice carried no surprise, only weary acceptance. "How are you handling it?" "I'm not sure I am handling it." Chloe sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "James, how long have you known?" A long pause. "Since the day you were born. Helen called me from the hospital, terrified that Richard would take one look at you and know the truth. But newborns, they can look like anyone. By the time your features settled into something recognizably Chen rather than Sterling, Richard had already convinced himself you were his." "You could have told me." "Could I? What would that have accomplished except destroying a family that was already fragile?" James's voice carried decades of regret. "Thomas never knew. He died believing you were Richard's daughter, and that secret protected him from a choice that would have torn apart his marriage, his relationship with Michael, everything he'd built." Chloe thought of Michael Chen's photos, his clear-eyed dedication to justice and truth. Does Michael know anything about this? Nothing. To him, you're just another Sterling, another wealthy family he probably reads about in the business pages. The irony is that you two would likely find each other fascinating if you met under different circumstances. You have remarkably similar values. Thanks to Helen's influence or Thomas's genetics? Does it matter? You are who you are because of choices you made, not because of DNA. James paused. Though I will say that watching you grow up, seeing your dedication to helping others, your instinctive rejection of wealth and privilege, Thomas would have been incredibly proud. The weight of that statement settled over Chloe like a blanket, comforting and suffocating simultaneously. "Emma and Marcus are meeting tonight. They think I'm hiding assets. They're not wrong. James, if I access this trust fund, Richard's will becomes invalid. The entire inheritance gets thrown into legal chaos. Emma and Marcus get nothing, at least not for years, while lawyers argue about the circumstances." His voice was gentle but firm. "I won't pretend the choice is easy, Chloe. But you need to understand something. Your mother built that trust fund with her own money, through her own business acumen. It was never part of Richard's estate. It's yours by right, regardless of any biological technicalities. But accessing it destroys my siblings' lives. Your siblings are already destroying their own lives. Marcus called me this morning in a panic. Apparently, he owes money to some very dangerous people. And Emma," James sighed, "Emma hired a private investigator to look into your finances. She's convinced you're hiding something." Chloe's blood went cold. "A private investigator?" "Victoria Hartwell doesn't mess around. If they dig deep enough, they'll find traces of Helen's financial activities, maybe even discover the safety deposit box. You may not have the luxury of keeping this secret much longer." After James hung up, Chloe sat in her apartment as darkness fell over the city, feeling like she was drowning in choices that all led to someone getting hurt. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. "Please come tonight. I know we haven't been close, but I need my sister right now." The word sister hit her like a revelation. Was that still true? Did biology matter when it came to the bonds forged through shared childhood trauma, through years of navigating Richard's emotional distance and Emma's casual cruelty? Marcus might not share her DNA, but he'd shared her experience of feeling inadequate in Richard Sterling's shadow. She thought about Angela, Marcus's 16-year-old daughter, who'd been calling Chloe more frequently since her parents' divorce. The girl was bright, idealistic, and increasingly troubled by her family's dysfunction. What would this revelation do to her understanding of family, of identity, of the adult she was supposed to trust? As Chloe prepared to leave for the Sterling estate, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The face staring back at her looked like Thomas Chen, like Michael Chen, like a woman who belonged to a family she'd never met, rather than the one that had raised her. But it also looked like someone Helen Sterling had loved enough to protect, with an elaborate deception that spanned nearly 3 decades. The trust fund documents felt heavy in her purse as she stepped into the San Francisco night, carrying secrets that could save her family or destroy it, and she was no longer sure which outcome her mother would have wanted. The fog was rolling in from the bay, swallowing the city lights one by one, and Chloe drove toward the Sterling estate through a landscape that seemed as uncertain and shifting as her own sense of identity. The coffee shop on Irving Street hummed with the comfortable chaos of a San Francisco morning. Students hunched over laptops, commuters grabbing caffeine fixes, the familiar symphony of espresso machines and muted conversations. Chloe had fled here after a sleepless night, needing the anonymity of strangers and the grounding ritual of normal life. She'd been staring at her untouched latte for 20 minutes when a voice interrupted her reverie. "Excuse me, are you using this chair?" She looked up to find a man about her age holding a camera and a notepad, his dark hair slightly disheveled and his eyes carrying the focused intensity of someone perpetually chasing a story. Something about his direct gaze made her feel suddenly visible after days of feeling like she was disappearing into her own secrets. "Oh no, please, take it," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her small table. Instead of simply taking the chair, he hesitated. "Actually, would you mind if I sat here for a minute? I'm waiting for an interview subject who might not show, and you look like someone who might have interesting perspectives on wealth inequality in the Bay Area." The irony of the comment almost made her laugh. "Wealth inequality? I'm David Kim, documentary filmmaker. I'm working on a project about inherited wealth and how it shapes family dynamics across generations." He settled into the chair, pulling out a small recording device. "Mind if I ask what you do for work?" "Social work," Chloe replied automatically, then found herself studying his face. Kim. Korean probably, with features that suggested his family had made the same journey hers apparently had, though through immigration rather than deception. "What made you interested in inherited wealth?" David's smile was self-deprecating. "Personal experience, I guess. My parents came here with nothing, built a small restaurant through 20-hour days and pure determination. I grew up watching them sacrifice everything for the next generation's opportunities. Then I got to Stanford and met kids who'd never worked a day in their lives but talked about their trust funds like they were inevitable as gravity. That must have been eye-opening. Infuriating, mostly. Though the more I've researched this project, the more complicated it's gotten. Some of these wealthy families are just as trapped by their money as poor families are by the lack of it." David leaned forward, his journalistic instincts clearly engaged. Take the Sterling family, for example. Tech mogul dies, leaves behind $200 million, and his kids immediately start tearing each other apart. What kind of legacy is that? Chloe's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. "You know about the Sterlings? Hard not to in this city. Richard Sterling's death has been front-page news for a week. Word is the family's already lawyering up for a nasty inheritance battle?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been trying to get an interview with one of the children, but they're not exactly accessible. The oldest daughter's a corporate lawyer with a reputation for eating journalists alive. And the others? The son's a venture capitalist with gambling problems, not exactly seeking publicity right now. The youngest daughter's a social worker, apparently. Lives modestly, works with at-risk families. She's the interesting one, if you ask me." "Why?" "Because she's the anomaly. Born into incredible wealth but chose a life of service instead. Either she's genuinely committed to social justice, or she's rebelling against family expectations in a very expensive way." David pulled out his phone and showed her a photo from a Sterling Foundation charity event. "That's her. Chloe Sterling. Have you ever encountered families like that in your work, where one kid completely rejects the family paradigm?" Chloe stared at her own face on David's phone screen, taken at a fundraiser she'd attended reluctantly 2 years ago. In the photo, she stood slightly apart from Emma and Marcus, her simple dress contrasting sharply with their designer attire. She looked uncomfortable, out of place. Which, she now realized, she literally was. "Sometimes," she managed, "family dynamics can be complicated. Tell me about it. My parents still can't understand why I'm making documentaries instead of becoming a doctor or engineer like they planned." David pocketed his phone. "But I guess we all have to find our own way of making sense of where we come from. The words hit her with unexpected force. Making sense of where we come from. Did anyone really understand their origins? Or were they all just constructing narratives that helped them navigate the world? Your interview subject isn't coming, is he? She asked, noting that David had made no move to leave despite checking his phone repeatedly. Probably not. These wealthy families don't like talking to documentary filmmakers, especially when the topic might make them look bad. He grinned. But this has been a better conversation anyway. Most people just give me rehearsed opinions about wealth and equality. You actually seem to think about it. What's your documentary going to argue? That money doesn't create monsters, it reveals them. Some families use wealth to build something meaningful, to create positive change across generations. Others let it poison everything it touches. David's expression grew serious. The question is what separates the two. What makes one person use inheritance responsibly while their sibling becomes entitled and destructive? Chloe thought about Marcus's desperate phone calls, Emma's cold calculation, her own secret fortune sitting untouched while her family destroyed itself. Maybe it's about whether you see money as a tool or as validation. Interesting. Can you elaborate? If you need money to prove your worth, then you'll never have enough. But if you see it as a way to accomplish something beyond yourself... She trailed off, realizing she was essentially describing her mother's letter, Helen's hope that Chloe would use the trust fund to help others. David was watching her intently. You sound like someone who's thought about this personally. Before Chloe could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Aunt Chloe, can we talk? Dad's acting weird and Mom won't answer my calls. Something's wrong. The 16-year-old's message pulled Chloe back to the immediate crisis. While she sat in a coffee shop having philosophical discussions about wealth with a stranger, her family was imploding in real time. Angela was caught in the middle, collateral damage in a war she didn't understand. I'm sorry, she said, standing abruptly. I have to go. Family emergency. David rose as well, extending a business card. I hope everything's okay. If you ever want to continue this conversation, or if you think of anyone who might be willing to talk about their experiences with inherited wealth. Chloe took the card, noting the contact information for someone whose last name she now shared, at least genetically. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a filmmaker investigating the exact situation she was living, and she couldn't tell him that his perfect case study was sitting across from him in a coffee shop, struggling with the most impossible choice of her life. Thank you, she said simply. This was illuminating. As she walked away, she could feel David watching her, his journalistic instincts probably telling him there was more to her story than she'd revealed, which was accurate. There was about $80 million more to her story, wrapped in family secrets that would make his documentary write itself. But first, she had to figure out whether there would be a family left to document. The Sterling estate loomed against the darkening sky like a monument to secrets and disappointments. Chloe sat in her car for a long moment, watching the windows glow with warm light that belied the Cold War brewing inside. Through the library windows, she could see Emma pacing, her animated gestures suggesting she was in full legal assault mode. Marcus stood by the fireplace, a drink in his hand despite the early hour. James Chen's car was already in the driveway, which meant this wasn't just a family meeting, it was an intervention. Angela answered the door, her young face tight with worry. Aunt Chloe, I'm so glad you came. They've been fighting for hours. What about? Dad thinks Emma's trying to have him declared mentally incompetent. Emma thinks someone's hiding money. And Mr. Chen keeps trying to get them to calm down, but they won't listen. Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. Dad's been drinking since breakfast. He's scared, but he won't tell me why. Chloe pulled her niece into a quick hug, feeling the weight of the trust fund documents in her purse like a physical burden. Whatever happens, remember that this isn't about you, okay? This is about adults making bad choices. But it is about me, Angela said, with the clarity that sometimes came from being 16 and watching the adult world with unforgiving eyes. If Dad doesn't get the inheritance, I can't go to college. If he does get it but keeps gambling, we lose everything anyway. And Emma, She shuddered. Emma talks about me like I'm just another asset to be managed. The conversation in the library stopped abruptly as Chloe entered. Emma stood behind their father's massive desk like she was claiming territory, while Marcus occupied his usual defensive position by the window. James sat in the leather chair where Richard had once held court, looking like a referee in a match that had already turned violent. Finally, Emma said, her voice carrying the sharp edge that had intimidated corporate adversaries for years. We need to discuss some financial irregularities that Victoria discovered. Financial irregularities? Chloe kept her voice steady despite the panic building in her chest. Victoria Hartwell emerged from the shadows near the bookshelves, her presence adding a predatory energy to the room. Miss Sterling, my investigation into your father's estate has revealed some interesting discrepancies. It appears your mother maintained several financial accounts that weren't included in the family's standard disclosure documents. The room went silent, except for the grandfather clock's relentless ticking. Chloe could feel 3 pairs of eyes studying her reaction, searching for tells that would confirm their suspicions. What kind of accounts? She asked. Investment portfolios, business partnerships, even a safety deposit box registered under her maiden name. Victoria's smile was sharp as surgical steel. The question is whether you were aware of these assets and whether they constitute part of your father's estate. Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with alcohol and desperation. Chloe, if Mom left you something, if there's money we don't know about, there's no money, Chloe lied, hating herself for the deception even as she recognized its necessity. The truth would destroy them all, but in different ways than they imagined. Emma's eyes narrowed. James, you were Mother's attorney. Are you aware of any undisclosed assets? James met Chloe's gaze across the room, a lifetime of professional ethics, warring with personal loyalty in his expression. Your mother was a private woman who valued financial independence. She made several investments over the years that weren't part of your father's business interests. That's not an answer, Emma snapped. It's the only answer I can give without violating attorney-client privilege, James replied firmly. Victoria pulled out a tablet, scrolling through documents that made Chloe's blood run cold. Ms. Sterling, I have records showing that you visited First National Bank yesterday and accessed Safety Deposit Box 1247, which was registered to Helen Chen Sterling. Care to explain? The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Chloe could see Angela watching from the doorway, her young face reflecting the family's dysfunction back at them like a mirror. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the choice between truth and loyalty, between justice and family. I found some old photos and letters, she said carefully. Personal things Mom wanted me to have. Photos and letters that required a safety deposit box? Emma's courtroom training was in full display now. What aren't you telling us, Chloe? Marcus moved closer, his desperation palpable. Please, if there's anything, I'm drowning here. These people I owe money to, they're not the type to wait for probate courts. They want payment now, or they start getting creative about collecting. What people? Angela's voice cut through the tension. Dad, what are you talking about? The weight of family secrets pressed down on the room like a physical force. Chloe thought about her mother's letter, about Thomas Chen's unwitting gift of genetics, about the $80 million that could solve Marcus's problems while creating infinitely larger ones. There are things about our family that you don't understand, she said finally, addressing the room but looking at Angela. Things that would change how you see everything. Emma leaned forward like a predator sensing weakness. What things? Chloe reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against the trust fund documents. One revelation would end this conversation forever. Emma and Marcus would learn that their inheritance was built on a lie, that their father's will was invalid, that the sister they'd always dismissed held more power than they'd ever imagined. But it would also destroy any possibility of the family healing, of building something honest from the wreckage of Richard's legacy. Mom loved us, she said instead, withdrawing her hand empty. She loved us enough to protect us from truths that would have torn us apart. Maybe we should honor that. Emma's face darkened with frustration. This isn't about love, Chloe. This is about legal obligations and financial transparency. If you're hiding assets, I'm not hiding anything that belongs to you, Chloe said, and realized it was absolutely true. The trust fund was hers, built with Helen's money, protected by Helen's careful legal planning. Emma and Marcus had no claim to it, regardless of biology, but using it would still destroy them. James stood slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. Perhaps we should continue this conversation when emotions aren't running so high. No, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I don't have time for emotions. I need solutions. Chloe, I'm begging you. If you know something, anything that could help. The desperation in his voice cut through her defenses. This was her brother, regardless of DNA, the golden boy who'd protected her from Emma's cruelty when they were children, who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped her with homework. His flaws were real, but so was the family bond they'd forged through shared survival. And there was Angela, watching the adults in her life tear each other apart over money, while her future hung in the balance. Chloe made her choice. There might be something, she said quietly. But accessing it would come with consequences none of us are prepared for. Victoria Hartwell's investigation had been thorough and merciless. The evidence spread across the Sterling Library's conference table, like autopsy photos, bank records, investment portfolios, and financial statements that painted a picture of Helen Sterling's secret empire. Emma stood over the documents like a general surveying a battlefield, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of vindication. $80 million, she said, her voice cutting through the morning silence. Our mother had $80 million in assets that she never disclosed to our father, never included in any family financial planning, and apparently left entirely to Chloe. Marcus sank deeper into his chair, his face gray with the kind of exhaustion that came from hitting bottom and discovering there were sub-basements to explore. 80 million, he repeated numbly. While I'm dodging loan sharks and selling everything I own to cover gambling debts. Chloe sat perfectly still, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. The safety deposit box key felt like a brand against her skin, where it rested in her pocket. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to retreat to her modest apartment and pretend this conversation wasn't happening. The legal implications are clear, Victoria continued with professional detachment. If these assets were acquired during the marriage using community property, they belong to Richard's estate. If Chloe has accessed them without proper disclosure, she's committed fraud. It wasn't fraud, James Chen said quietly from his position near the window. Helen's investments were made with her own family money, inherited from her parents before she married Richard. She had every legal right to maintain separate accounts. Emma whirled on him with courtroom precision. Then why the secrecy? Why hide $80 million from your own family? Because she knew this would happen, Chloe said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. She knew that money would turn us into strangers. We already are strangers, Emma shot back. You've been lying to us for days, hiding assets while we fight over Dad's will like vultures. How does that make you any different from the rest of us? The accusation hit like a physical blow, but it also kindled something fierce in Chloe's chest. Different? Emma, I've watched you spend the last week trying to have Marcus declared mentally incompetent so you can steal his inheritance. I've watched Marcus spiral into addiction and debt while maintaining a facade that's destroying his daughter's faith and family. You want to know what makes me different? I never wanted any of this money. Bullshit, Marcus said, his voice thick with alcohol and betrayal. If you didn't want it, you would have told us about it immediately. You would have shared it. Shared it? Chloe stood, feeling years of suppressed anger finally break free. Like how you shared your gambling addiction? Like how Emma shared her plan to destroy your reputation in court. We've all been keeping secrets, Marcus. The difference is, mine wasn't slowly killing anyone. Angela appeared in the doorway, her 16-year-old face pale with the kind of adult understanding that children shouldn't have to develop. Stop it, she said quietly, but her voice carried enough authority to freeze the room. Just stop. The adults turned toward her like guilty children caught fighting. Grandpa died a week ago, Angela continued, her voice gaining strength. A week. And you're already destroying each other over money. Do you think he would be proud of this? Do you think Grandma would want her money to tear apart what's left of our family? Angela, sweetheart, Marcus began, but she cut him off. No, Dad. I'm tired of being the only adult in this room. Her eyes moved between the three siblings with devastating clarity. Aunt Chloe, if you have money that could help Dad get out of debt and keep our family together, why are you keeping it secret? And Dad, if you're in enough trouble that people might hurt you, why haven't you asked for help? And Emma? She turned to her aunt with the kind of unflinching honesty that only teenagers could muster. Why do you care more about winning than about keeping your family safe? The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe looked at her niece. Technically not her niece, according to Helen's letter, but family in every way that mattered, and felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her shoulders. Because, she said finally, the money comes with a price that would destroy everything you think you know about who we are. Emma stepped closer, her lawyer's instincts sensing blood in the water. What price? What are you talking about? Chloe reached into her purse and withdrew Helen's letter, her fingers trembling as she held the envelope that contained the power to end this conversation forever. Mom left me more than money. She left me the truth about our family. And once you know it, there's no going back. Marcus leaned forward, his desperation overriding caution. What truth? The truth about why Dad was always distant with me. The truth about why I never felt like I belonged in this family. The truth about why accessing Mom's money would invalidate Dad's will entirely. Chloe's voice broke on the last words. The truth about who I really am. Victoria's professional composure cracked slightly. Ms. Sterling, if you're suggesting that there are questions about paternity, I'm not suggesting anything, Chloe said firmly. I'm telling you that opening this letter will change everything. Emma will lose her inheritance. Marcus will lose his. And we'll all lose the illusion that we're actually a family. The letter seemed to pulse with dangerous energy in her hands. She could see the calculations running behind Emma's eyes, the desperate hope warring with fear in Marcus's face, the growing understanding in Angela's expression. But if I don't open it, she continued, Marcus might end up dead, and Emma will spend the rest of her life trying to prove I'm a fraud. And Angela will grow up thinking that family means nothing when money is involved. Open it, Angela said quietly. Sweetheart, you don't understand. I understand enough. Angela's voice carried a wisdom that belied her years. I understand that secrets are poisoning this family. I understand that Uncle Marcus is scared and Aunt Emma is angry, and you're trying to protect everyone by carrying the weight alone. But maybe some truths are worth the pain. Chloe looked around the room at the faces of the people she'd called family for 28 years. Emma, brilliant and driven but terrified of being found lacking. Marcus, charming and broken but fundamentally decent beneath the addiction. Angela, wise and strong and deserving of a family that didn't tear itself apart over money. And James, who had kept Helen's secrets for 5 years and watched the Sterling family slowly poison itself with greed and hidden truths. Are you sure? She asked the room. Because once you know, we can't unknow it. Emma nodded grimly. Marcus closed his eyes and whispered, Please. Angela simply said, We need the truth. With shaking hands, Chloe opened the envelope and began to read Helen's letter aloud, her voice steady and clear as she demolished the foundation of everything they thought they knew about themselves. The Sterling family's war was about to end, but not in any way they could have imagined. The Hidden Inheritance, Parts 8 to 10. Final. Part 8. Finding Clarity. The words of Helen's letter hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Chloe's voice had remained steady as she read aloud the revelation of her true parentage, but now silence filled the Sterling library with the weight of 28 years of deception finally exposed. Emma sat frozen, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been relief. The inheritance battle she'd been fighting so viciously had just become meaningless. If Chloe wasn't Richard's biological daughter, then his entire will was based on false premises. Marcus spoke first, his voice hoarse. Thomas Chen, James's brother. He looked up at the family attorney with new understanding. You've known all along. James nodded gravely. I've been carrying this secret since the day Chloe was born. Your mother made me promise to protect all of you from the truth unless it became absolutely necessary. Necessary? Emma's voice cracked like breaking glass. You let us tear each other apart for a week when you could have ended this with one conversation? Could I have? What would you have done with this information, Emma? Used it to contest your father's will? Destroyed Chloe's sense of identity? Your mother was protecting everyone, including you. Angela moved to sit beside Chloe, taking her aunt's hand with the instinctive kindness that defined her generation's approach to family complexity. So you're my cousin, not my aunt. That doesn't change anything for me. The simple acceptance in Angela's voice broke something open in Chloe's chest. It changes everything legally. The will, the inheritance. Fuck the inheritance, Marcus said suddenly, startling everyone. Chloe, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for putting you in this position. For being so desperate about money that you felt you had to carry this alone. Emma stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane. Our entire family is built on a lie. Dad raised a daughter who wasn't his, left her money in a will that's now invalid, and Mom built a secret fortune while watching us fight over scraps. Not scraps, Chloe said quietly. $200 million isn't scraps, Emma. And you're right. Our family was built on lies, but not malicious ones. Mom was trying to protect everyone she loved from an impossible situation. What about Michael Chen? Angela asked. Your half-brother. Are you going to contact him? Chloe had been wondering the same thing. I don't know. He doesn't know I exist, and telling him would disrupt his entire life. Just like this disrupted ours. But it might also give you family who actually understands you, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. Someone who shares your values, your approach to life. God knows we Sterlings haven't been great at that. Emma turned from the window, her expression shifting from anger to something more complex. The trust fund. If you access it, what happens to Dad's estate? It goes into legal limbo for years while courts sort out the paternity issues. You and Marcus would eventually get something, but not quickly enough to help with your immediate problems. Marcus laughed bitterly. My immediate problems are about to become permanent problems anyway. Tommy Nakamura isn't going to wait for probate court. What if we found another solution? Chloe asked suddenly, an idea crystallizing. What if I used Mom's money to help you with your debts, and we worked together to establish something meaningful with Dad's estate? A foundation, maybe. Something that would honor both Mom's values and Dad's legacy. Emma stared at her. You'd give up $80 million to save us? I'd give up the money to save our family. There's a difference? Chloe stood, feeling steadier than she had in days. I met someone yesterday, a filmmaker investigating wealth inequality. He said money doesn't create monsters, it reveals them. I don't want to be revealed as someone who chose financial security over family. Even after how we've treated you? Emma's voice was small, vulnerable in a way Chloe hadn't heard since they were children. Especially after how you've treated me. Because that's what family does. We protect each other from our worst impulses. James cleared his throat. There are legal pathways to make this work. Helen structured the trust fund to allow for charitable giving without triggering the paternity disclosure requirements. If Chloe wanted to use the money to establish a foundation, help with Marcus's debts, even support Emma's children's education, it could all be done quietly. Angela squeezed Chloe's hand. What would you call the foundation? Chloe thought of her mother's letter, of Thomas Chen's obituary, of the family she'd never known and the family that had raised her despite everything. The Helen Sterling Foundation for Family Crisis Support. For families dealing with the kind of impossible choices that tear people apart. For the first time in a week, Emma smiled. Not the predatory expression she wore in courtrooms, but something genuine and warm. Mom would have liked that. She would have loved it. Marcus agreed, then looked directly at Chloe. And she would have been proud of you for choosing us over the money. I'm not choosing you over the money, Chloe corrected gently. I'm choosing how to use the money in a way that honors everyone Mom loved, including the daughter she could never publicly claim, and the family that raised me despite everything. The afternoon sun streamed through the library windows, casting new light on the Sterling family's future. Uncertain, but for the first time in years, hopeful. 6 months later, the Helen Sterling Foundation occupied a converted Victorian in the Mission District, its warmly lit rooms a world away from the cold elegance of the Sterling estate. Chloe sat in her office, reviewing grant applications from families in crisis, when James Chen knocked on her open door. "Someone here to see you," he said, his eyes twinkling with barely contained anticipation. Behind him stood a man in his early 30s with familiar dark eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from living according to one's principles. Michael Chen looked exactly like the photos she'd studied, but seeing him in person hit her like a revelation of genetics and possibility. "Miss Sterling?" His voice carried Thomas Chen's gentle authority. "I'm Michael Chen. I think we need to talk." They sat in the Foundation's garden, surrounded by the sounds of the city and the distant laughter of children from the playground next door. Michael had learned about Chloe's existence through careful research, triggered by his discovery of his father's old business partnership with Helen Sterling. "I found letters Dad wrote but never sent," Michael explained, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. Letters to a daughter he'd never met but somehow knew existed. He suspected, toward the end, but never had proof. Would he have wanted proof? Michael considered this carefully. "I think he would have wanted you to know that you were loved, even if he couldn't say it directly. Dad spent his whole life protecting people, the environment, his family, his principles. He would have understood why Mom, why Helen, made the choices she did." They talked for hours, sharing stories that revealed the genetic threads connecting their approaches to life. Michael's dedication to environmental justice, his wariness of inherited wealth, even his preference for practical solutions over dramatic gestures. All of it felt like looking into a mirror that reflected not just features but values. "The Foundation," Michael said eventually, "it's exactly what Dad would have done with that kind of money. Help families navigate impossible choices without judgment or conditions. You could be part of it," Chloe offered carefully, "if you wanted. We're always looking for legal counsel with environmental expertise." Michael's smile was gentle but definitive. "I appreciate that, but I think we both understand boundaries." "I'm glad you exist, Chloe. I'm glad we found each other. But I have my life in Seattle, and you have yours here. Maybe being siblings means respecting that distance while knowing the connection exists." The wisdom in his response confirmed everything she'd hoped about her biological family. They understood love as something that didn't require possession or constant proximity. A week later, Emma arrived at the Foundation unannounced, looking uncharacteristically nervous. The past 6 months had changed her therapy, a scaled-back law practice focused on family mediation, and genuine effort to rebuild relationships with her children had softened the sharp edges that had defined her for years. "I have a proposition," she said without preamble. "I want to volunteer here. Legal services for families dealing with inheritance disputes and custody battles." Chloe studied her sister's face, searching for hidden agendas or manipulative angles. Instead, she found something she'd never seen before: humility. "What changed?" she asked. "Watching you choose family over money when I spent my whole life doing the opposite. Realizing that all my legal victories never made me feel as satisfied as watching you help one family stay together." Emma's voice broke slightly. "I want to be someone my children can be proud of. Someone Mom would have been proud of." The Foundation's evening support group met in the main parlor, a circle of families navigating crises that money couldn't solve but understanding could ease. Marcus had been attending for months, his own recovery serving as proof that addiction could be overcome with honesty and support. As Chloe watched Emma awkwardly introduce herself to the group, she thought about the letter from Helen that had started everything. Her mother had hoped the trust fund would allow Chloe to help others, but she'd probably never imagined it would also heal the family she'd tried so hard to protect. Angela, now a senior in high school, stopped by after her shift volunteering at the Foundation's youth program. "Dad's been sober for 4 months," she reported with quiet pride. "And Emma's kids actually smile when they see her now, instead of just posing for her Instagram." "And you?" Chloe asked. "How are you handling all the changes?" Angela considered this with the thoughtfulness that had always made her seem older than her years. "I think I understand now why Great-Grandma Helen made the choices she did. Sometimes protecting people means keeping secrets, but sometimes it means telling the truth, even when it's hard." The evening light filtered through the Foundation's windows, casting warm shadows across the space where the Sterling family had learned to rebuild itself on foundations of honesty rather than assumptions. The money had been the catalyst, but the real inheritance, Helen's capacity for love and sacrifice, had been present all along, waiting for the right moment to transform destruction into healing. Outside, San Francisco hummed with the energy of families making their way through another day, carrying their own secrets and hopes and impossible choices. And in a converted Victorian in the Mission District, 3 siblings who had finally learned to see each other clearly continued the work their mother had started, protecting families from the kind of damage that money could cause, while honoring the love that money could never buy. 1 year after Richard Sterling's funeral, the family gathered not in the opulent estate that had witnessed so much pain, but in Chloe's modest apartment for Angela's 18th birthday. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Mismatched furniture, takeout containers, and laughter that came easily because it was genuine rather than performed. Marcus looked healthier than he had in years, his face clear and his eyes bright with the kind of contentment that came from honest work. He'd found purpose running the Foundation's financial literacy program, helping other families avoid the debt traps that had nearly destroyed him. 18, he mused, watching Angela blow out candles on a grocery store cake that somehow felt more celebratory than any of the elaborate parties the Sterling family had once thrown. "When I was 18, I thought money was the measure of everything. Success, love, worth, all of it came down to numbers and bank accounts." "And now?" Angela asked, cutting cake with practiced ease. "Now I know that the only number that matters is how many people sleep better at night because of choices you made during the day." Emma laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "Listen to you, becoming a philosopher in your old age." "Recovery does that to you," Marcus replied without defensiveness. "Makes you think about what actually matters." Emma had changed too, in ways that went deeper than her simplified wardrobe or reduced work schedule. The sharp angles of ambition had been replaced by something more sustainable, purpose that didn't require stepping on others to feel valuable. "I had coffee with Victoria Hartwell yesterday," she announced, causing everyone to look up in surprise. "She wants to refer clients to the Foundation." Apparently, watching our family nearly destroy itself over money was a wake-up call about the kind of lawyer she wants to be. "People can change," Chloe said, thinking of her own journey from invisible middle child to someone who'd learned to use power responsibly. "Even people we're sure are beyond redemption." Angela opened her gifts, modest things, chosen with care rather than expense. A photography course enrollment from Marcus, encouraging her artistic ambitions. A refurbished laptop from Emma, acknowledging that practical support mattered more than grand gestures. And from Chloe, a letter of recommendation for the social work program at Berkeley, along with a check to cover her full tuition. "You don't have to," Angela began, but Chloe cut her off gently. "It's not charity, it's investment in someone who's going to make the world better. Besides, what's the point of having money if you can't use it to help people you love achieve their dreams?" They talked late into the evening, sharing stories and plans with the easy intimacy of people who'd survived a crisis together. The Foundation had helped over 200 families in its first year, but its most important success story was sitting around Chloe's kitchen table, finally understanding that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in relationships built on truth. As the evening wound down, James Chen arrived with a bottle of champagne and news that made everyone go quiet. "I had a call from Michael Chen today," he announced. "He's getting married next month, and he wanted me to ask if you'd like to attend, Chloe." As family, the invitation represented something Chloe had been slowly building toward, a relationship with her biological family that honored boundaries while acknowledging connection. Michael had visited twice, easy conversations that felt like discovering favorite books in a language she was just learning to speak. "I'd like that," she said simply. "All of us, if you're willing to come." The Sterling family, biological, chosen, and everything in between, raised glasses of champagne in a toast that Richard Sterling never could have imagined when he'd written his carefully ambiguous will. "To Helen," Chloe said, "who loved us enough to give us choices, even when they were impossible ones." "To second chances," Marcus added. "To family," Emma concluded, "in all its complicated forms." Angela, wise beyond her years as always, offered the final toast. "To the courage to choose love over fear, even when love is harder." They drank to futures built on honesty rather than assumptions, to money used as a tool rather than a weapon, and to the revolutionary idea that family could be something you built rather than something you inherited. Outside, San Francisco glittered with the dreams of millions of people making their own impossible choices. And in a small apartment in the Richmond district, 3 siblings who had finally learned to see each other clearly continued the work their mother had started, proving that the most valuable inheritance wasn't money at all, but the capacity to love others despite their flaws and your own. The Helen Sterling Foundation would grow and evolve, helping countless families navigate crises with dignity and support. But its real legacy was already secure, written in the transformed lives of people who had learned that true wealth meant having the courage to choose connection over control, healing over revenge, and hope over fear. The brass key that had started everything now sat in a small frame on Chloe's mantle, a reminder that some doors, once opened, led not to destruction but to the possibility of building something better from the pieces of what came before. In the end, Helen Sterling's greatest gift to her children wasn't the money she'd hidden or the secrets she'd kept, but the example she'd set, that love sometimes meant making impossible choices, and that the courage to face truth, however painful, was the only foundation strong enough to build a family on. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.